If you're interested in velocity-based training, I got a good Journal Club article for you today, Dr. Miller, with an article called Velocity-Based Training from Theory to Application by Weakley, I believe the author's name et al. The second author is a name that's written a book on this subject, Dr. Brian Mann. You may have heard of him. If you've been involved with strength training for a while, you might have heard that name. So let's get right into it. Velocity-based training from theory to application. This was published in Strength Conditioning Journal, which is the more practical journal of the National Strength Conditioning Association. This was published in 2021, which is recently published at the time of making this video. It's a pretty lengthy article, but it's almost like a mini manual, okay, on velocity-based training. So if you're not familiar with velocity-based training, I have a couple videos on this idea of auto-regulation. Instead of prescribing percentage-based loads or even RPE, you would use a linear transducer, some sort of device. Yes, it costs extra money to do this, but you can get one for under $400 now. That's at least it's reliable. Now, validity is obviously a problem as well, especially if you're trying to prescribe ranges. But you can at least get a scale of your own device as long as it's reliable. In other words, it's giving you a measurement that's this. If it's truly, 1 meter per second this time, and it really, it was 1 meter per second. And even if it's off and it's really 1.2 meters per second validity, it gives you 1 meter per second next time again. So, looking up the reliability of the device is going to be really important. I would highly recommend that. Validity is still important. Don't get me wrong. But even if you had what I'm getting at is even if you had a cheaper one that was reliable and you had to sacrifice some validity for it, there's ways to determine with a phone or, something like Canovia. I don't know how to say that. I use it in my biomechanics labs. It's a free software program you can download. You can do some bar tracking. The point is that it does require, velocity-based training does require a linear transducer. Now, you can use the old eyeball. That's what we used to do back in the day before we had these devices, is just watch. I still do that. I don't have these devices on athletes' bars all the time. In fact, hardly at all. I had a device I bought years ago that I was going to use, and then they quit supporting it, went out of business. I have a new one coming at the time of this video, so I'm looking forward to it. I had a Tendo unit that broke. It was an old Tendo. I bought it off of eBay, so it kind of deserved it. But I found it cheap and ran it for a while. Did that with some athletes. You need a linear transducer, okay? GymAware is probably one of the most popular right now. Those are all good systems. The ones I mentioned you have to be careful. There's a lot of systems out there, but again, you have to know the reliability and validity data on those systems. So, velocity-based training though is a way, and what I like in this article, one of the things it does outline is 4 different ways. I think it was 4 different ways to set up velocity-based training. So, what are the different ways? No, it was more than that. It was 6 different ways to set up velocity-based training. Okay, and so an example might be I'm going to say do 5 sets, and I'm going to tell you that I want each repetition in each set to be this speed, so 1.2 meters per second. And so put a load on the bar that you're hitting 1.2 meters per second every single rep of all 5 sets. And the 5 sets I could cap at reps, so don't do any more than 5 reps. But if you slow down below the 1.2 meters per second, then the set is over. So don't do more than 5, right? That could be one way. You could just let them run and say, I'm going to do as many reps as you can at 1.2 meters per second. And when the set is over at 10, fine. If the next set you do 3, fine. It doesn't matter. You're doing 5 sets, period. Again, these are examples I'm just kind of throwing off the top of my head. You could say, more load adjusted. And so, do 1.2 meters per second over 3 reps and adjust the load as needed from set to set. So you're going to do 3 reps. If you fall off X amount of meters per second, you need to take the load down, right? And so there's a set number of repetitions that must be met rather than just letting the repetitions run and you're doing it based off velocity-based training. So the point is there's a lot of ways to do this being velocity-based training. I think the bottom line of all this is there's some auto-regulatory undercurrents. So in other words, instead of forcing a program on the athlete, you're letting the program adapt to the athlete's current physiological and mental state, right? Which we know is a big deal. You can also do a good job of tracking. So if an athlete, in their program they're supposed to be hitting this load at certain meters per second and they are not there, they may be fatigued or they're crushing it, right? Maybe they've actually gained strength. The first part let me back up just a minute. The first part of the article does highlight the relationship between velocity and load and how to determine load. Using a couple different methods, the 2-point method, right? And then you could just build a whole spectrum of load-velocity relationship. So load-velocity relationship, obviously the higher the load, the slower the bar moves, right? And you can get this this relationship in a very simple ramp up with an athlete, and every athlete's would have their own profile then that they could work off of to determine what load at what meters per second and so forth. Okay, and then as that changes, that's easy to track over time. You know that they're moving a certain load faster. In this particular article, recommends like 100 kilos. You know, it could be a load that in a warm up perhaps that's always tracked, right? And so you do 100 kilos and it's X meters per second week 1, and it's X meters per second week 8. Well, you'd hope that that bar at a fixed load is being moved faster. Okay. Just a lot of ideas in here is what I'm getting. I'm kind of unloading on you as you're watching this. Like, oh, you've lost me drinking from the fire hose. There's just everything you want to know about velocity-based training is here. How to set it up, how to progress it, thinking about different ways in which you'd like to write programming, the cutoffs, and doing I think does a really nice job of explaining, over the course of an off season or a build up to a meet or something like that, setting the bar, not literally here, but more figuratively, setting the bar where the cutoff would be for the velocity, changing it from day to day or from week to week. For example, from the research literature, there's been some support that a 20% drop off in barbell velocity is a good good's probably the word. It seems to be probably the place to stop. How's that? I know I'm not saying that very clearly, but a 20% drop off in velocity. So from set to set or rep to rep, however you want to do it, when you see a 20% drop off, you know that it's time to quit, or make an adjustment to the load perhaps, okay? Or terminate like say you're in the middle of a set, terminate set. And so that 20% though, is a time to quit, but you could extend that out to 30% perhaps when you're trying to do more hypertrophy training, or you're willing to accept some fatigue and push the athlete a little bit further, so maybe overreach them a little bit. So early on in a cycle, the first 4 weeks, you might do a 30% cutoff, and then move towards the next 4 weeks, 20% cutoff, and then get closer to this. In season, perhaps it's only a 10% cutoff. So, you could change where the stop is, where the stop, if you know anything about stocks, where the stop loss is, like where you saying, I'm out, I'm not doing it anymore, okay? So it does a nice job of setting up training progression, all right? So that's what I'm getting at. So again, worth a read. If you you're a member of the NSCA, you should probably get the journal online. If not, I don't know if this is one of those public domain articles, but it's worth taking a look at if you're interested in velocity-based training. Dr. Mann's book, I think I did a book review on it as well, in the whole velocity-based training method. But this little manual, basically, it's an article, but I would say it's more of a little manual. It's quite a few pages. In the journal, it was page 31 here, including the references to page 49. So, that's an 18-page with some really nice pictures in here, demonstrating the progression over time. Backing up a little bit, showing the velocity, force velocity, load velocity relationship early on, and understanding how to set the max 1RM version of velocity-based training. It just does a really good job, and so highly recommend it. My personal opinion on velocity-based training, if you care. I know this is a journal club. It's a great way to train if you do it properly, and this is what I'll equate it to. Goal setting, right? Goal setting is cool. Goal setting is great. But a lot of times when people set goals, or I've done goals in the past, is you might be working towards that goal for a time. So you formalize the goal, you do the SMART goals, whatever it is. And, but then you kind of fall off of it. You say, well, that was fun. It felt kind of gimmicky. And I think velocity-based training, if you buy into it and it's easier to do in one-on-one setting, but if you're in a team setting or something, that could be more difficult, especially if you don't have the equipment for it. Or you don't have the oversight for it, right? And after a while, it's like, or athletes are not coming in consistently. Well, that's just, right? If you buy in all the way and you continue to use the method, whatever one of these different ways in which you decide to do velocity-based training, adjusting the load, adjusting the speed, whatever it may be, adjusting the sets, capping reps per set, whatever it might be. If you buy into it, you'll see success with it. We've seen in the research literature as a result of this velocity-based training, in terms of strength, you can gain strength by pushing loads closer to failure, heavier loads, or by using moderate to heavy to near maximal, or I would say even less than that, moderate loads with high velocities. And that makes sense because if you think about the 3 different ways in which we recruit muscle, we do motor unit recruitment, repetition method, maximal method, and dynamic method. Well, velocity-based training is a mix of the maximal and dynamic method, so that's kind of where you're getting the best of both worlds. Well, you can do lighter loads then as long as you're highlighting the dynamic method, moving as fast as you can. You should get stronger as a result of that, okay, because it's recruiting those higher threshold motor units, the same that maximal training does. So both of them work, but the dynamic version does not work if you do it erratically, if you are not going to follow guidelines and progress in some way, the way you set up the velocity-based training, it's not going to work. Again, if it's just a gimmicky thing that's done for a time and then you end up going back to the ways, I wouldn't even bother. I wouldn't spend the money. So, you could buy a transducer and play around with it and see if you like the method yourself. And then if you're in a one-on-one setting, you think you'd use it. I mean, I find that what happens a lot of times is I have an hour to train in a small space, train somebody. It's like, well, and if I have more than one athlete, it's like, it's really hard with one unit because I can't afford more than one unit. It's hard for me to train, right, multiple athletes, even with a push band or something like that. It's hard for me to stay on top of what they're doing if it's just me and 10 athletes or something. So this is, I think, the difficulty in velocity-based training. Maybe I'm just highly disorganized, which is probably the issue more than anything. But that would be my caveat to this: is you got to buy into it and you got to stay with it. If you do, you'll see results. If you don't have the money for this, linear transducers, you can still take this idea though, and you could use your eyeballs, right? There's a lot of apps out there that you can track our velocity with too, but you can just use your eyeballs, right? Just use your eyeballs. We've been doing that, like I said, for a long time. We've been doing that. If you've been watching enough people lift weights, you know when the barbell is not moving like it should. It should at certain loads. You expect it to move this way. RPE is again a surrogate too. The athlete's telling you 8, and it should be a 7. Well, you know that they're feeling that the load isn't moving well either, and you watch it, and you're like, yeah, confirmed. So we can triangulate data as well. The velocity-based training just takes a lot of that error out of there, if you want to think of it that way, that qualitative assessment, and makes it quantitative, assuming that the device is actually doing a good job. All right, that felt a little long-winded. I apologize if it was. Maybe I lost you already, but I do want to highly recommend this article. Again, it provides the list of previous research that's been done, at least the majority of it. I would call it more of a manual than I would call it a journal article. Well written, highly recommended. Okay, and this is Weakley, Velocity-Based Training from Theory to Application, Strength and Conditioning Journal, 2012. If you haven't already, take a look at some of the other articles that I've reviewed on video and books as well, and lots of videos on a variety of topics. I'll see you in the next video.